Welcome to I Need a Coach, where we interview top coaches, experts, authors, and speakers, hear their stories of success, who they help, how they help them, how they grow their business. My name's Adam Packard. I'm your host. And for the last 7 years, we've worked with over 500 coaches and consultants, helping them grow their business and help them with their marketing activities. Today's guest is Sarah Elkins, and she's going to share the power of storytelling, to use storytelling more in your coaching business. So you're going to want to listen to this one. Enjoy the episode. Okay, today I am joined by Sarah Elkins. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me, Adam. So cool to be on this.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. You and I talked a month or two ago, had a great conversation. You've got a podcast. I've got a podcast. So we got some fun synergy back in there. Seems like everybody has a podcast, but we'll dive into that. But tell us a little bit more about the work you do, who you help. Give the audience a little bit of a taste of that.
I've been thinking about how to introduce what I do, and I was hired to do a storytelling for professionals workshop for an emerging leaders program out of a major organization across the country. And I did a 90-minute workshop to help them. It was professional development for this group, how to share the stories that demonstrate what they're really, really good at based on their StrengthsFinder results. So basically, I had all of their StrengthsFinder results in front of me, their little placards with their top 5 strengths on them. And I would ask them to share stories about what they do, what lights them up at work. And then we could actually discuss how their strengths showed up in those stories. So the critical factor here is I'm not going to ask somebody with strengths that are more on the introverted side with lots of information. I'm not going to ask them to share the same kinds of stories. We're not going to have the same strategies as somebody that has more extroverted qualities. So it was so much fun. It was an emerging leaders program. So it's all people who want to move up through the organization, and being able to share the right story, whether you're networking or in an internal interview, is it's just going to tilt everything in their favor.
Yeah, I've always been told facts tell and stories sell, right? So
for
if
sure.
You can tell a good story and apply that to your business. Yeah, that definitely works. So the work that you're doing now, is it mainly just these workshops, or do you do one-on-one work or group work, or what is your, I guess, how do you bring the revenue in?
Well, my primary income does come from StrengthsFinder work. And most of that time, it includes that professional development side of storytelling. I say your strengths are your stories. Because when you're doing something that really lights you up, it means you're in the pocket of your talents. And when you share those kinds of stories, you're going to be more compelling. Whether you're sharing stories of being an accountant and finding something in a needle and haystack kind of accounting situation, or whether you're talking about your sales, being able to share that story demonstrates your ambition and your love for learning and all of that. So that's where my primary income comes from, is StrengthsFinder to improve communication in teams. But I also love to do keynotes on storytelling, because every professional benefits when they can share the right story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So walk us back a little bit. How did you kind of find your way into this? What did you do in your past life, and what did that transition look like into the work you're doing now?
Well, it's such a good question. And I think I'll start with a story. I had been...
I wouldn't expect anything less.
Well, I love customer service and customer experience work. I spent about 10 years in the restaurant industry. I spent a couple of years as a director of sales at a hotel, and I spent almost 20 years in the public sector and government agencies, from the federal government agencies like NSA down to state agencies like the state library here in Montana and the university system here in Montana, all the way down to the city government here in Helena, Montana, where I was a public affairs officer. And so I have all this experience around customer service, and I would train people in everywhere I worked. They would invite me to do trainings. So I did this customer service training, and I started writing a blog about it. And I wrote a blog about a stellar tour guide experience I had when I was in southern Germany, outside of Munich and Garmisch. This tour guide was so outstanding. I wrote a whole blog post about what made him such a great tour guide. and the International Tour Management Institute, they have clients, they teach classes on tour guides and tour managers, tour operators, bus drivers that run tours, that kind of thing. And they have an annual symposium, and they invited me to be their storyteller for that symposium. And I wasn't sure what they meant when they said, "Oh, we always have a storyteller. We'd love for you to come and speak." And I said, "And talk about customer service?" She said, "Oh, no, talk about storytelling." This is about almost 10 years ago. And I had that moment, the Richard Branson moment of just say yes and figure it out later. Mm-hmm. So I did. And of course, I got off the phone and I'm in kind of a panic. What am I going to talk about? And it all came to me. I did an example of storytelling of not a great tour guide, but I was telling the story from my perspective. And then I talked through the components of great storytelling, which includes body language, tone of voice, how you start the story, the structure of a story, what your goal is at the end of the story, and then story listening, because you can't be a good storyteller if you're not listening to other people's stories. And then the second half of that keynote was all another story about this wonderful, stellar tour guide that I had. And I had people stand up in the middle and share their own brief stories. So we were doing examples. It was so great. I had an amazing time. And after that, I stepped off the stage and I thought, I want to do more of this. It had such great impact. People came up to me and said, "I never thought about my stories that way, and that my personal stories are just as important as the stories I'm sharing as a tour guide." And it was like this, it was just so powerful. And as I'm walking through to go to the bathroom, because I'd had way too much coffee that morning, and I'm trying to get out of the room, I'm like in a hurry, and I'm kind of feeling a little anxious about it. And at least 3 or 4 people stopped me to say, "Is your book for sale here at the conference?" And I remember this internal moment of, uh-oh, now I have to write a book. And then ran to the bathroom. And a few years later, I did write a book, because what I realized is that people don't know what stories to tell. And they don't know which moments in their life are really going to be the most meaningful when it comes to sharing a story and how you want to be perceived by the people around you.
Interesting. So what's the book called?
It's the same as my podcast title, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. The concept being, it's not the things that happen in your life that make you who you are. It's how you talk about them. It's how you share them. And all of that relates to your internal message as well. Because if you're telling stories about your past that make you appear to be a victim, that's how people will see you. That's how people will treat you. And that's how you'll see yourself.
So a lot of our audience is either people that are looking for a coach or coaches that are trying to grow their business. How would you advise coaches to leverage stories? Like, where would you start? Obviously, get your book. I would recommend that, and probably listen to your podcast. But how can they incorporate stories more into the work that they do? What would be kind of your starting point to kind of guide them through that process?
That's a great question, Adam. I would start by watching other people tell stories and trying to figure out where you fit. What makes you comfortable? What makes you uncomfortable about certain stories and storytellers? I'm all about modeling. So if you are watching The Moth Radio Hour or listening to it, or there's a Montana one called Tell Us Something, and they do storytelling from the stage, you watch other public speakers, you listen to other coaches, and figure out what parts of stories are meaningful to you so that you can incorporate that into your work. The next thing I would do is make sure you have at least 2 stories of your experiences with clients, obviously not using names or specifics, but being able to tell the story like I did. I did this great workshop for an organization here in Helena, and this is what happened. Talk about the impact you have on your clients. So for instance, I remember getting a text message from one of my StrengthsFinder coaching clients. I've been working with her team, and she texted me a few weeks ago saying that she had just had a multi-minute conversation with her 16-year-old son. And for anyone who has, yes, for anyone who has interacted with teenage boys, you know that was a big deal for her. She had a heart emoji afterward and a laugh out loud emoji. that had made a difference. My work with her as a team and individually, because I always do one-to-ones with team members before we get into team dynamics. My interaction with her changed her relationship with her kid, which has so many ripple effects. So have a story like that in your pocket that you can share with people. Make it quick. And then the last thing I would say is make sure you have a collection of stories that are highly meaningful and relatable. They don't have to be epic. They don't have to be, I almost died, or the celebrity sighting I had. Have a handful of stories ready to share briefly. Because when you share a story that is meaningful to you, you will unlock the story of the person in front of you. If you're really listening, if you share that story with the intent of unlocking a story or an experience in the person in front of you.
So is the goal with if I'm sharing a story with someone that is a potential client on a call, is the goal of the story, and again, maybe this is part of the process of creating a good story, is the goal of it to connect with them at a more personal level? Is it to showcase expertise? What types of stories should I be telling?
Well, it's of course it's all of those things, and it depends on your audience. If you are talking to a potential client, you're doing a discovery call, and they say, what do you do? Which I can't stand that question because it's so open. So instead of answering, well, I'm a Gallup certified StrengthsFinder coach, or I'm an executive coach who helps women do blah, blah, blah. You do your 30-second elevator pitch. Instead of that, you say, well, I'd love to tell you a story about the impact I had on one of my clients. Yeah. So not only are you telling her what you do without telling her what you do, you're also connecting on an emotional level. They can, if you're telling the right story, as I said in the beginning, something that really lights you up, you are, first of all, going to unlock a story of the person in front of you and then listen. You have to listen. And then it's also, at the same time, making it so that that person feels like they can relate to you, that you are sharing something that matters. It shows your enthusiasm for the work that you do. And who doesn't want to work with somebody who's enthusiastic and thoughtful about the work they do?
So the stories shouldn't be sad. Well, I guess they can be, but depends on the context.
I'm so glad you said that, Adam, because I have worked with a lot of people who have had pretty significant trauma in their past, and they don't want that to define how people perceive them. So one of my very first clients had been diagnosed with MS, and I said, what's stopping you from sharing that on the stage? Because she had been a public speaker for years, but this was a new part of this, a new wrinkle. And she said, I don't want to be known as that woman with MS. And I said, so tell the story of your resilience. Don't tell the story from a victim perspective, which I've never heard you share in that way. All I hear is resilience and persistence from your stories. So if you have to tell the story of your trauma that brought you to the kind of coaching you do, I was in a horrible job, my boss was abusing me, whatever that is that brought you to coaching, start with the obstacle. Don't stay there. I would say 10%, maybe 15% of your story begins with the sad part. The majority of your story is the journey, which you can do all of this in a 3-minute story. Who did you ask for help? What resources? Because then you involve other characters. You acknowledge that you're not in this alone. Because what coach or what coaching client wants to work with a coach who's going it alone? You obviously don't believe in coaching if you don't have mentors yourself. So include your journey, and then how do you feel now? Doing the work you do, that's when I had this impact on a client that was so meaningful to me. That's the last part of your story. So yeah, sad stories definitely have a place in storytelling. You just can't live there.
Yeah. So if I have a 30-minute discovery call with someone, how many stories should I have and how many should I share?
Oh gosh. Again, that would be hard. There are some people that it's really hard to pull information out of them, and asking a bunch of questions just overwhelms them, or they feel like you're not sharing enough. So I would say it helps me to have their StrengthsFinder results in front of me, but that doesn't always happen. So I can ask 2 or 3 questions and pretty much figure out how their brain works in terms of StrengthsFinder. I can associate certain approaches that they would take just from asking a couple questions. So for instance, I was working with a team.
I was going to say, you better give us those questions now.
Yes.
You said that. So yes.
So 3 men walked into a room where I was working with 15 people with a small part of the CIO's office for the Forest Service. They were doing a retreat in Missoula, Montana. They hired me to do this StrengthsFinder work with them. And I had never met any of them. 3 of them walked into the room, and I had their nameplates with their top strengths on them in my hands. And I said, and you are, oh, wait, don't tell me who you are. I have these 3 nameplates in my hands. I'm looking at their strengths. And I said, tell me how you got ready for this trip. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, did you pack 2 weeks ago or did you pack this morning? Did you research anything related to being in Missoula, Montana? Did you want to find out the history of Missoula, Montana, or anything about the state? How did you talk about your trip? And when they started telling me, the first guy said, oh, well, I found out that there's this fire service organization here. They've been around for this long. They do all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, this is you. And I handed him his nameplate, and his eyes got big. He said, how did you know that? So asking questions like, how did you decide to reach out to me? How much research did you do? Did you just decide? You saw something I did and you went with it? Okay, that person probably has activator or strategic in their top talents. So if I know that, then I can ask them the questions and share the story that's going to resonate best with them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm trying to think of how, so obviously you have to, be knowledgeable in the StrengthsFinder. I mean, you could read the book, but there's so much more beyond the book that you can learn about the StrengthsFinder. I'm just thinking how someone could apply this. If I'm asking someone a couple questions, I think, maybe asking them, hey, Sarah, tell me your story. I want to hear more about, the work you're doing, but how did you get into what you're doing now? And what do you love most about it? Right. So that kind of gets them to open up and share their story, which is good. But then asking them, hey, have you researched a lot of other companies? Have you ever hired someone to help you in this area before? What are some questions that a coach could ask someone that's looking for potentially hiring a coach? Were there anything that, would be kind of a easy questions that they could ask?
Those were really good examples right there. How did you find me? I would love to know. I'd love to thank whoever referred me. And that alone, if they say, well, I've been researching blah, 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 then they want data. They want to know what steps you're going to take with them. What is this going to look like? If they say, well, so-and-so recommended you and I looked at your website and I love what you're doing here, then this is the kind of person that has almost already decided to work with you. And all you have to do is start asking them questions. Like, well, I just answered a question with a question. One question might be, what about your income producing activity, so your work, really lights you up? Tell me a story of a time that you walked away from work, a project or a person or conversation that really lit you up, that made you feel really satisfied. So that's one question where you can really identify what stories you're going to tell that will resonate with that person. I always love to look for clues, like, do you have any images of a person's dog or their kid in their Facebook profile or their LinkedIn profile? Do they talk about personal life or do they only talk about business life? Because if they're online and only sharing business stuff, then you're going to have to tread a little more carefully about the personal stuff in your first conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I post, if you look at my LinkedIn feed, I've got, personal posts, I've got value added posts, I've got motivational posts. I think people can learn and kind of connect with me on that level. It's not just promote. One question I usually ask, and I probably need to make sure I ask this every time, is why did you decide to schedule a call with me? It's like, you get 10 messages a day from guys like me. Why me? Why us? Why now? Right? And get them to say, well, it was your approach, or, I went to your website and I talked to a guy yesterday and he's like, I've been talking to a few companies, and one thing that really resonated with me was the fact that you have a family business. Your wife works with you, your dad works with you. He's like, I really like that. And I looked at his profile and we had a few things in common. So when we first started the call, I said, I think we're going to get along great. We both went to Penn State. You do yoga. That's where I met my wife. She was my yoga instructor. And you have a podcast called Yoga and Whiskey. I was like, I like whiskey. I said,
Ooh.
We're going to get along famously. And that started the conversation. So immediately kind of brought his guard down. So, and then we started talking about books that we were reading. And he's going to a Joe Dispenza retreat in Mexico coming up. And I was like, I've got his book right here on my shelf. And I showed him the meditation that I do. That's a Joe Dispenza. So it was like, just sharing those little stories, but I had to do a little bit of homework. I mean, I look at someone's profile for 2 minutes before you have a call and see what you can learn about them, and then maybe leverage that when you kind of starting the conversation.
Absolutely. I love that you brought that up, because I really believe in doing a little bit of homework ahead of time. For one thing, you can learn a lot, like you said, about who they are and how they're approaching things. And it's not necessarily all promotion, but if you see that they're only sharing things from their company, or they're sharing only professional information, that doesn't necessarily mean promotion, but educational information, whatever it is they're sharing, says a lot about how deep they want to go. And you can't start by going deep if that's a person that is going to be skeptical. I can tell you those 3 men that walked into the room for the StrengthsFinder workshop with the Forest Service, they were skeptical for sure. So I wasn't going to just dive right in with, you need to believe me. As a matter of fact, one thing I noticed is when I have StrengthsFinder results in front of me right away, if it's somebody that has analytical in their top talents, they're likely to be more skeptical. So I will actually print out some of the data off the Gallup website to show them where this information comes from, to say, look, this isn't a horoscope. You gave them all the information they need to predict your behavior. And if Google can predict your behavior, so can Gallup. You gave them all the information they need. The question is, what are you going to do with it? And one guy, of course, said, well, I'm not going to change just to meet somebody else's needs. And I said, okay, so you don't speak French. You go to France. You're wandering around and you want to go sit at a bar. You need to come find the bathroom, or you want to order some wine. Are you going to learn just a little bit of French so that you can communicate with them? Does that suddenly make you French? Are you changing who you are because you learned a little French? So being able to address things right up front, if you know that that's the kind of person you're dealing with, which you can find out just from doing a quick Google search, LinkedIn search, Facebook search, whatever. So yeah, that's a great question and great addition. Do a little homework. I have to say, it really drives me crazy when I get on a call with somebody and they're talking about starting a podcast. Have you ever thought about, like, I have 320 episodes out there. Don't ask me if I know how to start a podcast. And or the people who come in with all this advice right up front. Oh, you want to be a keynote speaker? You're going to need a sizzle reel. You're going to need a speaker one page. I'm like, thanks. Did you not look at my website at all? Did you not even? So yeah, do a little homework.
Yeah, no, that's so key. So tell us a little bit more about the podcast. So who is it designed for? Who's the audience, and what do you share on that?
Oh, I love my podcast. There are so many times in the multi-year, 6 years, just over 6 years now, and 300 and something episodes every Tuesday. And it's designed to help people uncover their own stories. So what I found, again, when I started my podcast, is that people don't know what story to tell to demonstrate who they are. And if somebody says, oh, I'm really generous, they're probably not doing it right. If somebody has to tell you they're an expert, they're probably not doing it right. You need to be able to demonstrate your expertise. And if you can't say, I'm a really good cook, if you can't cook for somebody, you have to be able to tell the story of the amazing butterfly salmon you made on the grill the other night with this perfectly cooked wild rice that had mushrooms sauteed and whatever. tell the story, because otherwise saying I'm a great cook isn't meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I would say that the most important aspect of being able to share these stories is simply demonstrating who you are, your character, your vision. I don't know. So that's what the podcast does. It helps people identify what their values are at any given time, because they change over time. Your priorities change over time. And it helps. I have a lot of coaches that actually listen to this podcast. Probably the majority of people listening are women in their 40s, 30s, and 40s, just getting into that transformation period of their career and lives where they're either nearly empty nesting or they're empty nesting. They're trying to figure out what their purpose is now that they are either no longer with children or they never had kids. Maybe they're in the middle of a divorce. It's that transformational period. In a lot of men have this going on too, but it seems to be that mostly it's the women that come to me to say, I don't know what I can do anymore, because they haven't been collecting the evidence from their stories about all of their skills and their passion, their purpose, their meaning, where they're going to find relevance.
Interesting. This has been super helpful. I think it's going to resonate a lot with people. I mean, the power of storytelling, obviously we know it works. I don't think we all implement it the way we should or can. But yeah, so where can people find out more about you if they want to learn more about your work and follow you?
Well, thanks for asking, Adam. My website is elkinsconsulting.com, and that's the easiest way to find all of my other links, including my book, my podcast, the keynote speaking I do, and the StrengthsFinder descriptions and all the testimonials from the clients that I've worked with. And connect with me on LinkedIn for sure. That is my primary social media platform. I love it. I've created amazing community on that platform, and I love to grow it. So absolutely connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Sarah, it was a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thanks for coming on, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of I Need a Coach. If you've made it this far, I genuinely appreciate your dedication. Putting this podcast together takes a lot of time and energy. In return, we only ask one thing, which is if you could please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps our show get in front of more people so we can help more people. This is Adam Packard signing off. Keep coaching, keep thriving, and see you in the next episode.